Kristen Zemke has to say. So we probably should go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to the Summer Institute, Virtual Summer Institute for the Niswonger Foundation. We appreciate all of you guys joining us. And this is the first time I'm going to do this. I don't know Kristen Zemke, so I'm actually going to read about Kristen Zemke and not just sit here and talk about her, because I'm a little laid back, but that's not going to work with this one.
It's great.
Kristen Zemke she has co-written several different books. She's recognized as an international expert in literacy, inquiry, and technology. She collaborates with organizations around the world to develop learning experiences that redefine school. And she's currently serving as a resident teacher and learning innovation specialist for the Big Shoulders Fund. Kristen's been recognized as an Apple Distinguished Educator, Chicago Public Schools Tech Innovator of the Year, National Board Certified, and Emerging Leader by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Her work's been featured by Apple, EdWeek, Mindshift, and Scholastic. It sounds like you are super busy, Kristen Zemke, so we're out of your schedule to come join us. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat. My name is Allison Seeley. I will try to kind of keep an eye on the chat if anybody has any questions or if anybody have any technical problems. And at the end of the session, I will drop a link in there to where you guys can get your certificate for this session. And it is timestamped, so you need to make sure you kind of fill it out in a timely manner and get it back to us. I think that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kristen. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Allison. Hi, everybody. Good morning. I am super excited to spend a little bit of time with you. I see some familiar faces, so thanks for coming again to those of you that are back. And today we're going to really just talk about, everything we may not yet know about digital literacy. And this is something that I'm super passionate about. I've done research on for, probably the last 6 or 7 years, and have been seeing it applied in classrooms since, I don't even know, 2006 or something like that. So a little bit conversation about if we go to home learning again, and a little bit of conversation regarding what this looks like if we're in class, because there's a lot that we need to know about digital literacy. I am in Chicago right now, and tomorrow is our last day with students. So I feel like, I know you guys have probably been out for a lot longer, but I feel like, oh my gosh, crawling to the finish line, and just have my first plans are to sleep, because it's just been such a really hard year, as everybody knows. So I'm thinking ahead to summer travel and can I go anywhere? And, I think maybe it's fantasy travel in my head, but I'll probably just be driving anywhere 2 or 3 hours from Chicago. So I hope you guys are thinking about taking a break for yourself as well. And, hopefully maybe some of you have just unplugged for a couple of days too, as we, get into the summertime mode and get thinking. So I wanted to share a couple of things with you. And, part of my work has been, my work became more well known from this book, Amplify, Digital Teaching and Learning in the K-6 Classroom. And then I have a new book out that is called Read the World, Rethinking Literacy for Empathy and Action in a Digital Age. And this is K-12. So this is kind of where my writing partner, Katie, and I, who's a middle school teacher, looked and said, okay, let's really analyze this technology piece. And for us, what that looked like was, getting over the things, right? And I think this was especially highlighted during COVID, that there were so many things and tools and resources out there. And as someone who's been, in ed tech for over a decade, I quickly realized it was not about the tool, it was about the thinking. And so as we worked for this next book, we really pressed pause on all the things. We don't want education to get distracted by things that are shiny and fancy, or get guided to tools by developers and venture capitalists saying like these are the best tools for education. We want it to come from teachers. And so as we thought a lot about this, we really thought back of like, what do we know is important with technology? And of course, first and foremost, the people, right? Like we have to keep the humanity in anything that we do digitally. And 9 times out of 10, that's our students. The other 10% is our parent community and our school community. And so as we really took a step back, rethinking like, why, right? Like Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why. We thought, you know, the real benefit of technology is not that we have access to thousands, millions of websites or teaching tools, but the real purpose of technology is first to help kids tell their story. Like every kid has a story to tell, and in being able to tell their story or share it with the world, that's a moment of value and empowerment. Your story matters, you matter, share it with an audience and see what happens. So step one, looking at telling students stories, having students tell stories. Then as they tell their stories, it naturally dovetails into teaching kids how to listen to the stories of others. And we listen to the stories in our school community, and then we expand and start listening to the stories of the world. And that's the benefit of technology. Like now we can actually know what's happening in other places in the world. And when we teach kids about close listening and strategies to use, that dovetails into empathy and compassion. And so now by just hearing more stories, we can weave that into social emotional learning and discuss some of those more powerful aspects. And hopefully in hearing the stories of others and discussing the effects of that, that leads kids to be inspired to take action in some way or be advocates and activists. If they hear a story from around the world, that inspires them to do something and to go public with it. Even if you're a first grader, like you can create something that raises awareness, funds something, you know, leverages the stories of others to build a more inclusive community. So tell stories, hear stories, be inspired to take action upon the issues. As a literacy person, I'm always thinking about like some core pedagogy pieces, because the tech is nothing if it's not connected to helping kids comprehend and remember and reuse information. So David Pearson's work on active learning, Pearson was of course the first person that said we need to make the learning experience more active. And so he was the first that led us down the path of turn and talk, right? Draw and write your thinking. Go investigate and research something. And so we want to hold on to these active behaviors anytime we're using technology, and keeping them on the front of our brain if we're doing something like home learning again with COVID. You know, it is not a good instructional practice to sit behind a screen for 5 or 6 hours a day, for 3 hours a day, for 2 hours a day. It's even hard to do that for like 1 hour right now as adults. And so we're mindful of that. The other big piece is Richard Ellington's work on reading achievement. And what Ellington found was that in order to be a strong reader, you need volume, the opportunity to read a lot. You need choice over the text and titles that you read. Fontes and Pinnell did a follow-up on this about 4 or 5 years ago, and what they found was that kids can surpass their independent reading level by up to 2 levels when given choice over the text that they read, because they're motivated, they're engaged and they're like passionate about finishing this piece that might be a little bit out of their range, but it's that next step in proximal development for kids. And then the third piece was real and authentic places to talk about what they're reading and to respond. So we think about those opportunities with digital reading, but then I think we can apply those 3 principles to digital learning as well, that we need time and a lot of it to practice using the technology so that we get fluent with it. We need choice over the process and the product. And when I say we, kids need choice, right? Kids need choice in like what apps they're using to get there and how they're synthesizing their learning. And then they need real and authentic purposes to discuss, to interact, to view the work of others. And that spurs an idea like, oh, yeah, next time I'm going to make a video like Jason did or whatever, right? So we're looking to hold on to those pieces. Stephanie Harvey and Ann Goodvis are my mentors. They've done a lot with comprehension strategies. And I actually wrote my first book with Steph, but their strategic reading, and has now been updated to strategic learning, is looking for all these processes to happen. You know, like, are kids able to ask questions and what they interact with, infer and like make sense based on their background knowledge, determine the most important information, or these days we name it key details, right, in a piece of print or visual text, and then the ability to summarize and synthesize. And so for me, probably like 80% of the time, I'm connecting whatever we're doing with tech back to this and saying, okay, what is this evidence of? This is evidence of you know, kids using their background knowledge. This is evidence of a student asking questions of the author as they go. One piece that I think is critically important for all educators to read is the National Council of Teachers of English came out with a new position statement in November. So it's relatively recent, but it's all about updating their beliefs and views on digital literacy. And so as, you know, tech changes, so does literacy. And the way we teach literacy just needs a little bit of an update many times to get kids to effectively use the tools that they have. So I'm going to ask you to, on a piece of paper, even if you just have like a little scratch piece of paper, like a sticky note, right? Anything will work. Or if you don't have any paper within reach, feel free to write a list in the chat. But I'm just going to ask you to make a list of all the different ways you read across the course of a week, right? So from books to email, how many ways do you read? And I'm going to give you 90 seconds to do this. All right, maybe 60. So just a quick write time. So go ahead and make a list of all the different ways you read across the week. Ten more seconds. All right, so if you're writing in the chat, please post your list. If you were writing on a piece of paper, hold up your list to the camera so that we can all see. Awesome, I got recipes too. Email, right? Magazines, nice. Texts, yeah, so many different ways that we are reading. And sometimes we don't even know that, like, we don't even realize that we're reading. Maybe like a year and a half ago, I was at the airport and I was standing in line like to board, and I realized like I was watching whatever, you know, crazy news was on at that moment, which seems less crazy at at this moment. Maybe back then it wasn't so crazy. But I realized like, oh, the ticker at the bottom that tells you like what's next on ESPN or what's happening around the world. I was like, I'm reading, like I'm even like looking at TV and reading at the same time. Sarah, nice one, social media, right? Bethany, TV subtitles, same as me, right? And magazines, thanks page. There's just so many different ways to read. And I think like even just like building awareness of that and noticing as a grown-up, this is so powerful, right? Because the definition of reading has been expanded, and we need to refine how we used to address and identify reading into some new categories today. And so as we look at this, we still say, yes, like books live on, books will endure, we will always have books. And every year I ask kids, you know, their feedback on books, and they give me responses like, your book never runs out of battery. You know, if you accidentally fall asleep on it, it's kind of soft and not all pokey, like if you were on a Kindle or something. So like books endure, but I think we say yes to books and yes to all these other things, because there are so many opportunities to hook kids in the thinking experience that it's about adding more tools, not replacing something. And I think we have to keep that on the front of our minds as we're, you know, in a situation where we're maybe teaching more with digital devices like we have been the last couple of months. And so that's kind of where our idea for Read the World came from. It's not just reading print, but it's reading all of these things that you encounter on a regular basis. And so for us, you know, much of this was inspired by Paulo Freire and his work on pedagogy of the oppressed, and how he talked about like context and location and art was such an important teaching tool for cultural reference. And so we took a lot of inspiration from that and are just looking to continually redefine what we know. So some interesting statistics that pertain to middle schoolers. Smartphone use has grown dramatically, even amongst like young tweens, right? So if we start looking at our sixth graders, look at what a quick jump that was in a 4-year time span. And we know not all kids have access, right? But nothing has shown us that more than the last couple of months. But on a national average of students from all different socioeconomic backgrounds, we're looking at like about 80% of 14-year-olds have some type of access to a smartphone. This was very interesting to me, and I think it's something that we all probably experienced, was that device usage is determined by social SES, right? And so kids who have devices at home in affluent families, they typically have some type of computer that they can work out of. However, out of low income families, we find kids are typically working on their smartphone or a parent's smartphone to do homework digitally. And I think like that was just a huge aha, it totally makes sense. But then just thinking about how many times have I modeled like how to do Google Slides on my phone, right? Like I've done this in class, like on a Chromebook, I've showed it. We typically use Chromebooks, but have I ever like put my phone under my document camera and been like, so let me show you how to get the slides on a phone? Because as you know, the layout of a phone is completely different than a laptop, a Chromebook, any other device. And if kids are using this as their primary independent tool when they're outside of school, then we should be teaching them how to do those things as well. I also think just, in a post-COVID experience, that when we surveyed the families at my school, and my school's in an under-resourced community in Chicago, most families said, we have access to a device at home. And we're like, all right, good, like we're doing it. But very quickly after 3 weeks, or like at the start of that third week, when they realized like this was going to have to go on for a lot longer, all of a sudden we had families saying, we need devices, and started lending those out. So I think it's just different how we think about these things, but these are important pieces to keep in mind as we're working with tweens and teens. So when we talk about e-text, like the broad term of what we're doing on device when reading, it's e-text, right? But when we're reading, like those lists of all the things that you guys just made, reading on device varies by format, right? Anyone knows that reading social media is very different than reading a PDF on a smartphone or an iPad. You think about reading a website, right? It looks so different on your computer versus what it looks like on your phone. And even to find the different pages, right? You have to click those 3 little lines to see where the different pages are versus like on our computer, it's all just right across the top. So like we have so many different formats of reading that we teach. Then it also varies by device, right? And like that's an easier piece to understand. Reading on a phone is different than reading on a laptop, is different than reading on a Kindle. And so when we look at the research on this right now, what we're finding is that there's so many different combinations for how we read that it's incredibly complex, right? Because now we have to teach how to read a PDF on a computer, smartphone, Kindle. How do we read an ebook? All these different pieces. And so we really need to look for opportunities to first name it, and then second to teach some of those strategies, because a print reading strategy doesn't always transition seamlessly to a digital reading strategy. And there's even research that if we do like the exact same lessons for reading in print and reading on a device, there can be some harm done in specific formats. So when we look at like device, right, and I am totally guilty of this, I've just been like reading on a device or digital reading or on-screen reading. However, when we name what we're reading in paper or on print, we have countless different genres for every type of reading. And within those genres, each genre has specific strategies that help you understand that genre or know how to read it at a different level. So it makes sense that we start growing, our mini lessons for e-text or on-screen reading, just like we've done the last 50 plus years for our mini lessons in print, right? Like every year we try to make our mini lessons for reading and thinking a little bit better. We need to be doing the same thing with our on-screen reading as well. Anne Magnan, who has done the majority of this work, and at the very start, she did a research study somewhere around 2007 that said reading on a device, it negatively impacts comprehension. And this got a ton of attention in the reading community and in schools because people were like pushing back on computers. But like a good researcher, she kept going. And her original study where reading or comprehension was negatively impacted was done on a stationary desktop computer. And so as the tools change, right, like by definition, a laptop is a different reading experience. A Kindle is a different reading experience, your phone, an iPad. She kept on with her research, and now what she thinks is that it's so complex that we can't just teach reading in ELA time, that we need to teach it in every subject across the day because it's the access point for interacting with all types of content. So in math, we need to be teaching digital math strategies when interacting with, pieces of information or learning on a device in social studies, in science, in, like almost every subject, because there's so much work to do to onboard kids to some of those new strategies that we really need to be thinking about those pieces. So let me take a moment there and pop into the chat here. What questions do you guys have? Like feedback, ideas, what's resonating with you right now? Feel free to unmic or type in the chat. Diane, that aha moment, right? Of like, of course, kids are reading on phones, right? If you have some smaller device. I know I had that same aha moment too, you guys. When I first saw this study, I was like, duh, like, what have I been thinking all this time? Like, why didn't I realize that? But I think especially with like middle school age, we started before we had to go to home learning to start doing this, or making like Loom videos or how-tos that we could then post to classroom websites or Google Classrooms. So if you're working off a phone in order to access this, let me show you the 5 steps, right? Because we needed to do that and then give them a resource to go back to, right? Like kids are so familiar with books as a resource, but if you're just starting to do some of this work on a new type of device, like we wanted to have a little video that they could watch from home if they forgot, right? So I think like those aha moments at the time, it makes you so excited to learn something new, but it makes you feel like, I don't know, I always am like, what kind of teacher am I that I didn't even realize like something like that? And I was like, okay, I just have to be kind to myself and keep going and keep learning.
I was just thinking as a high school English teacher, how many times we assign papers and how many kids are trying to, I mean, I know they're good at texting, but are they trying to write papers on their cell phones? And when you get just that small of a screenshot, I mean, you can't really proofread that. And, and so how many more mistakes there's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, I guess it's a smart thing to be mindful of. Kids are trying to do that kind of stuff. It's not just reading, but it's also writing stuff on their phones.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of the new research shows that the majority of kids, regardless of background, in terms of financially speaking, are doing most of their composing on a phone because it's the tool they always have with them. And it's mobile and it's fast, and even doing things such as like speaking into their phone and having it type up, right? So like my mind explodes all the time thinking about some of those things. There's a question about how do you do this with math and encourage math, and I think a lot of this goes back to, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dan Meyer's 3-act math, where he breaks it, triangulates it into sections where there's like a reading, a video, and then some problem to solve, but it's all like contextual and situated in life to bring that relevancy. And so his advocacy work is, instead of doing, like 80 problems for homework or, in class, give them 2 or 3 really thought-provoking problems that they can spend an extended amount of time on, because they're multi-layered, right? Like you have to figure out some things in order to figure out the final thing. And so we're really looking at that as a strategy for doing it with math and situating things in like real world problems for students. So I think for COVID, for example, we had math teachers in the high school setting that were teaching the strategy using like a document camera, right? Where kids could see them writing and interacting. And then that would post, right? So they could see all of the square roots and orders of operation and whatnot. But then they were also posting something for them to read in order to come up with what the numbers were, what the ideas were, how they needed to set it up. And then students would record a video using something like Loom where they could draw and solve the math problems and then speak over it. So kind of really looking at like all those moments of interaction, right? They got to watch the teacher, and the benefit of that was you can watch as many times as you need to. And I am totally the person that needs the instruction like 5 times before I get it. So like that's a huge affordance with video. Then you can go and try and record it and think through and revise it. And then students have the opportunity to like see math in the real world too.
Wow, I can't. 11 o'clock. I was just gonna say, I dropped the link to the certificate in the chat. But I guess we need to kind of start wrapping it up. This really flew by. Oh, wait,
I think it's like a half an hour, right?
No, yeah, I don't know what time it is.
Hey, you go to 11:30.
Keep going.
All right.
Sorry.
I don't even know what day it is.
I was like,
I don't even know what day it is. I was looking for my link under yesterday's sessions, and I was like, no, it's the 17th.
Ignore me. Sorry, keep going. You got plenty of time.
No, good. And I think, yeah, I can give you guys a link to Dan Meyer's work. Let me drop that in the chat here really quickly. Just a sec. Dan Meyer, 3X. All right. Find that chat. There we go. Here you go. There you go. Dropped it right there into the chat so you can take a little bit of a look at that when you have time. Let me go back to sharing some things because I got a little bit more that I would like to get through with you guys. Let's see here. All right. Great. Can you guys see my screen again? Perfect. Okay, so one of the things we wrote about in our book was that, like, yes, these are all the things on the left that we are holding on to, right? Whether it be inquiry groups or literature circles or, you know, reading deeply. And we're using technology to enrich some of those practices. And I think like the piece I want to talk about next is just this idea of students decoding and comprehending text, but also images, also graphics, thinking about like, oh, like as things go more in a virtual reality way, like what will we have to teach for kids to deeply understand that experience? And if you've ever done virtual reality with kids, you know, like they put these like Google Cardboard glasses on and then they just like spin around really fast and try to look at everything. But we need to be intentional and be like, okay, take your glasses off, turn and talk with a partner. If you're in class, take your glasses off and draw and write your thinking. What are you saying? What does that make you wonder? Like annotating virtual reality. And then just teaching them to closely read that experience too. So we're thinking about a lot of these different things. And one of the things I want to show you is this idea of using visuals to amplify thinking. So if you could all just like unmute yourself and think aloud as we engage in this image study, that would be really helpful. So I'm going to show you a couple images, but I would like to hear from at least like 1 or 2 people for each part that I show. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? And I talked about this a little bit in the inquiry group yesterday, but this idea of see, think, wonder are great roots for organizing students for close reading of any type of multimedia information, right? So thank you for unmuting. I'll show you the first screen. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder?
I see some smoke.
Smoke? You're wondering.
I see fire.
Fire?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm wondering.
Kind of accident.
Must be a fire somewhere.
Yeah. Why the focus is like the power lines or so right there, right? All right. What do you think now? What do you see?
I think it's pretty widespread fire.
Pretty wise. What do you see that makes you say that?
Fire on both sides of the street, it looks like. Probably a street.
So that's your text evidence, right? Like you are applying that same closely reading strategy of text evidence because you're looking at this closely, right? As we look at this, we're wondering like, where is this? Is it a forest fire, a brush fire? Keep thinking.
I wonder what started the fire. Oh,
Volcano.
Well, you know, in language arts, that used to be one of our standards, analyzing photographs.
Yeah.
That looks like lava.
Good.
What do you think
Wait.
now?
Oh,
Wow.
It's a
wow.
volcano eruption.
Yes.
I
Yes.
wonder how long that person could stand where they are to take that picture.
That is exactly what students ask all the time. Is the person safe? Who's taking the picture? Because that's their empathy coming out, right? And that's an opportunity to name that and just say, see how you're being concerned for someone else? Like photographers, journalists, media people take risks all the time as they look at this. Incidentally, this is like an anchor chart that I might make to go with this type of image reading. And I heard, because you guys were unmuted, thank you for that. I could hear some people be like, oh, or like, you know, like those physical responses to emotion, right? And when we start naming that for kids, that's another tool they can use to apply to help build comprehension, right? Like when I have, you know, like a circle mouth, that's like, right? Like surprise or like, wow, or like, oh my goodness, I never knew that before. So we're looking for opportunities, and that's another way to teach the compassion and empathy piece. This is that same road about 3 weeks before from Google Earth, right? So we can see this is what it was. And then this is what it is. All these photos are from the 2018 eruption of Kilauea in Hawaii. That was just so dramatic and forceful. And so many times we're using these pieces of images to hook kids into either the curriculum or the inquiry or the study, right? Like, what do you see, think, and wonder here?
Meeting.
Are they?
Reminds me of Mount St. Helens,
Mm-hmm.
the big cloud.
Yeah, students have been, students are so funny about this one in particular. Like I've had kids ask every time, like, what are that guy's priorities? You know, is he golfing or is he like trying to save his life? And then students oftentimes say, to me, that looks like it's photoshopped. Right? Because like, how could all these things be in concert in the same photo? And so that leads into a really nice way to discuss media literacy and checking your sources. And this is the one they also have a ton of empathy for, because they tune in to that gas mask on her face and they want to know, is she safe? How fast is the lava moving? How hot is it there? But just giving these pieces to like, build background knowledge, right? And this is especially helpful for language learners, for students that have some type of diverse learning need, for the whole class to center what they do in these powerful image pieces. And this is a place where we have kind of stepped away from this good practice of KWL, right? What do you know? What do you wonder? What do you want to learn? And moved into this language of see, think, wonder, because so frequently with KWL, our first conversations about a topic that we don't know are rooted in misinformation. You know, like, what do you know about volcanoes, or, you know, whatever the topic is. Kids say things like, A, because a compliance model of school signals that they should say something, and B, because they're just trying to interact and, you know, like make those statements. But it's not a great launch to your inquiry or your unit of study if there's misinformation from day one. Then the next question we always ask is, what do you wonder about this? And if kids don't know enough about the topic, then it's really hard to ask good questions without background knowledge, right? So like, this is where teachers get in that place where we're like, their questions are either like this big or this big. And if we build background knowledge, then we have this shared experience that doesn't matter what your reading level is, and we're building background knowledge together. So this is a way that we start pre-K through 8th grade at my school. This is how we start every unit of study. I also think it's a way to get kids like hooked into the curriculum. Like sometimes they have choice about what they want to research and study, but sometimes like we have science curriculum and social studies curriculum that we have to teach. Doing this is that bridge to getting kids to care about it. Right? So if we can like hook them in with something interesting, then their mind starts going at a little bit of a different rate. So I'm gonna just share with you here really quickly and jump into my desktop here. Here's some of my favorite resources for finding photos. All right, there's Dan Meyer's stuff. Let me show you right here. This is a great resource for kids of all ages, Photos for Class. I'm not sure if you guys have seen this before, but it's all photos that are Creative Commons fair use for classrooms, right? So if a kid needs a photo to put in a presentation, a paper, on a blog post, they can reuse these images all day, and teachers can too. So if I type something in like volcanoes, anything that has volcanoes will pop up, right? So like, okay, here, this looks like a good volcano photo. You can see the cones right there. When I click to download that, check this out. So here I have my photo to use in any way, but look at the citation is already built in at the bottom. So as kids put it in their work, they're citing it. And we found that with like students of all ages, it just really makes them aware of who created the image, you know, and really starting to tune in to some of those citation pieces as well. So that's one of my great handy dandy resources. A few others, I think the Learning Network, I shared this yesterday. They have a specific section called What's Going On in This Picture, where you can get some great images. And I think Wonderopolis is another great resource for these things. I think something that's a new piece of our instructional practice needs to be graphics, and specifically infographics. Historically, we've kind of glossed over these pieces, thinking that they're pictorial in nature, and so we haven't taken a deep dive in how you go about this reading process. And if you look at these two different examples here, there is so much content in each like originally like 3x3 graphic that was inserted into a piece of text somewhere. But even like, how do you approach it? Do you read at the top? Do you start at the bottom? Which are the important words? How do we focus in on that? And I think this has been a really big piece as the SAT updated their formatting in 2016 and again 2017. So there were always graphics in the math section, right? Like that's a part of understanding and thinking about math. But in 2017, they added graphics into the ELA section. And so much so, on many instances, they asked kids to read a piece of informational text and read a graphic and then compare and contrast the two, right? So like that's a big leap for students if we haven't done that before. And so as you start noticing graphics in your daily life, you'll see them everywhere once you're aware of it. And then it's a great way to bring interest and curiosity into the classroom as well. New York Times also has a site, the Learning Network is who they partner with, that's called What's Going On in This Graph. And it's just a compilation of information from all over the world, typically appropriate for like 5th grade and up. There are some that are a little tricky for middle school, but there are many, many resources there. So please check that out as well. And then video, right? Like this is such a huge affordance for us and for kids. You know, with COVID, we have taught a lot on video, whether it be watch this video, then respond, but we haven't slowed down enough to actually teach kids the way to read video with the intent to learn. Right? And so we need to do a quick mini lesson and then watch what kids are doing, then like add on the next steps. But like we're teaching them, you know, you view with your brains straight on, you think about what's actually happening, you're drawing and writing. When you get to the end of the video, you go back and reread it again. And we're using the same language that we use in reading so that we are mirroring all of those comprehension pieces that we taught in reading and science in order to understand, again, as we do video. And maybe like different from when I was in high school and we watched like all 2 hours of Romeo and Juliet. Now we look for video to be 2, 3, 4-minute clips that are really powerful and engage thinking. All right, so let me show you this video. Just maybe make a little quick list or write in the chat, what are all the features that pop up in this? So what does a kid have to know how to do in order to deeply interact and comprehend this video? All right, this is one of my favorites. Take a look.
The eruption of a volcano can be one of the planet's most destructive events, spewing huge amounts of rock, gas, and ash that can kill people, cause crops to fail, disrupt air travel, and even alter the weather. But not all eruptions are cataclysmic. Some are a lot quieter and far less deadly. There are many types of volcanoes, but all are cracks in the earth with a chamber of molten rock or magma underneath. The hot magma is lighter than the surrounding rock, so it rises. As it does, gas bubbles form, increasing pressure. The magma starts to flow, taking the path of least resistance. Once the magma reaches the surface, it's called lava. If the lava is thin, the gases will bubble out easily and the lava will flow quietly. But if the lava is thick, the gases will cause it to erupt explosively, creating boulders, cinders, and ash. Some volcanoes have a collapsed central section, called a caldera, that can act like a plug. As the magma flows elsewhere, the caldera may sink until it cracks and the magma has a new path to the surface. Then the volcano can literally blow its top.
All right. So what were some of the things? Yeah, compare and contrast, right? Location, dates, tags, cross sections, right? Vocabulary words that were in there. What I would do of this, just like we ask kids to read informational text multiple times and take another pass at it, the amount of content that video was 1 minute and 33 seconds. So the amount of content that comes in a video is often 10 times as much as what you would get in that actual like reading of something for 1 minute and 30 seconds. So students are going about this as a tool for learning, right? So on the very next time, what I would do is say, okay, now go back and reread that video. Make a list of all the words that you need to know in order to understand this, right? And so together, we would then make a list of the words that we need to research, and that becomes like our vocabulary, like our content word wall, right? So kids are building the list of words that they need to know so that they understand the purpose of that. But we just have to teach them how to reread that video, or like press pause so you can write down your thinking. You know, like that's something that's so simple, but we just have to name that and give them some time to build fluency with that piece as well. Does that make sense? All right, cool. So let me just show you one more little piece here. And I think like this is where a lot of the importance comes, right? We saw that, right? We still have books then, right? Like in a face-to-face setting, then we're gonna be like, if you wanna learn more about volcanoes, here's a whole collection of books, right? And kids can go off and do research in multiple formats, right? It's not great for them to do all their work on screen. That's why I tried to have you guys like do some writing on paper, right? Like take your eyes off the screen and do some writing and have some type of interaction. Turn and talk during a Zoom call, right? Like unpack those pieces, because we know that good instruction is not one-dimensional, it's layered. And so that's true whether we're at a teach from home or teach in class scenario. So books would be a very real piece of this as well. Oh, I forgot I had the slide in here, right? Like make your own word wall, make a list of all the words you need to know, go back and view it again. And then I think it's really important to name that we want kids, we know that like mentor text works to promote reading, writing. Yeah, we can use mentor text in science as we're like studying the habits of great scientists through reading. When we think about our digital work, we need mentor tech. Like what are the highest quality places that we want kids to go in order to find more information, right? And so we're really being mindful of what we put in front of them. I shared yesterday that like everybody will go and Google it, right? But like Google is oftentimes not the best resource for students because it's just so fast, right? And another thing we have to teach with that is a keyword search, right? And so like you put in volcanoes into Google and like 12 million results pop up, right? And so we talk about, can we read all these? No, so let's say more about that. And that's how we start teaching keyword searches, volcanoes in the continental United States. Then you're down to like 1 million hits, right? And so we just give some concrete examples of those types of things. But then we say, if you're doing research, here's some places that will get you quickly to the data and the facts that you need. And we're introducing them to a couple of pieces. We're doing this with graphics, with videos, with images, with news sources for kids, and saying, all right, here we go, right? And I think many times, especially as you're just starting some of this digital reading, you want to organize the information in a fashion that kids can access and use very easily. So for us, like pre-K through 8th grade, we always start the year with like, here are a number of different articles, videos, graphics about bottled water. And these are all things that we've previewed and curated for kids because we know it will help them find the information quickly. And then we'll watch a video and we'll talk about the strategies that you need to watch a video and how to organize your thinking. We'll use this as a place to go to read images and to give them some of that front loading. This is an example on Padlet. You could also make a very simple Google site that has 5 or 6 videos in there, and these are the places you're going to go to do your research. You can even do it with something as simple as Google Slides, right? And say step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Here are all your different types of resources. So we think about what that looks like as we invite kids to click through with hyperlinks and images and video and maps, and really just all of these affordances that we might not have specifically taught before. So thoughts, questions, feedback. I'm looking in the chat here to see if you have questions. Yeah. Yeah, great for any type of inquiry work. Really good for a time like when we were home with COVID, where you're trying to check a lot of boxes with some unit of study where you're reading, you're writing, you're drawing, you're learning about history, you're thinking, you're analyzing. A nice way to tie it into that too. Yeah, Candace Edpuzzle is another great tool to use for this. And there's a couple great things out there like right now. I will put some of those in the resources after we close our meeting today. But it's not as hard as you think. Or may think, and people are probably already doing a lot of this, but I think so much goes back to the actual naming of this. I wanted to just share two of my favorite sites. I shared photos for class with you, but the other one that I love for video is this one. The kids should see this. Just about 5,000 videos for curious minds. It's an amazing site, even if you're an adult. Like, I love watching these videos, but this is an easy way for students to find the content that they need. First, as teachers, you can see in the toolbar here, there are so many different topics. We're used to like science, animals, nature, food, right? But then we get into some of these things we don't see so frequently, like do it yourself, music, art, history, animation. So it's a way to really just like give kids some time for open inquiry and research like we discussed yesterday. But when I go to this site, I can find content super quickly. So if I'm creating that volcanoes launch, right, that would be a lesson launch into a unit of study, I can type volcanoes into this site and 47 videos with volcanoes pop up, right? So we can go and start pulling from all of these things. We can use these over time. This is like my one-stop shopping for video. But the great thing about this, this tool would also be that kids can use the the site as a search engine to find the content that they really care about or want to know a little bit more in depth about. So say like making music at home. I don't know, this just came into my head. All right, so here are 2 videos about making music at home. But if we just go and look at this music category, there's 550 videos, right? So maybe I need to say more about making music at home in order to categorize some of these different pieces. If I wanted to search something like, let's say civil rights, let's just see what comes up for that. Right, there's 22 videos about civil rights. And so I think teaching kids to use this as a search engine is really powerful. The other site that I like to teach kids to use as a search engine is Wonderopolis. It's a blog a day about a variety of different topics, but same thing. If you type in something here, like, let's say, I don't know, light, I don't remember what that inquiry was for. If we type in something like light, then it has 330 blog posts about light, and every blog post has a listen to feature right here, so it can go with text to speech, so an easy built-in accommodation for kids that might need it. It launches with some guiding questions, and then here comes the blog, right? So you can read it. Every post has a video and images built in. So this is kind of like encompassing all those digital literacy pieces into one site. So, and yes, bias, right? That would be a mini lesson that's tied into that unit of study. And so one of the pieces that we did a lot of writing in our book was author's perspective. And where does information come from? Is that author getting paid? By who? Whose message are they reporting? And so the whole idea of pulling it together on something like a Padlet or a Google slide would be that, like, A, we're teaching them how to read the digital media, and B, it's a source for triangulating information, right? And we want them to read something and then have that, like, wait a second, like the other post said this about that. Like, why are they talking about the two things? And finding them differently. And so I think, like, that's why I like organizing it like that many times, because I'm intentionally putting those things that they need to be aware of as we weave media literacy into some of those pieces too. So good noticing and good thinking on that part too, right? Of course, we're going to be pro water. Yeah, you know, it's fascinating as a teacher too. So questions, wonders before we wrap up here?
I'll just leave the wrapping up to you, since clearly I don't even have any concept of time.
Yeah, Padlet is such a great resource for home learning, because you can almost, it's a simple way to build like a website with all of the information that kids need. One-stop shopping, right? Like, that's how I think about it. Like, where's the one place I'm going to get them to go in order to access what I want them to do? And Padlet is a great one. I'm also going to just drop in here Wakelet. Wakelet is a newer tool, but it works very well and is free, completely free as of right now. So fingers crossed that'll stay free for educators. I hope this was helpful. I think, like, the first part for us is noticing it as educators. Like, where are we noticing digital media? How are we naming it? And then how are we applying the language we use for reading, so that kids already have that connection to background knowledge for how they go about the process of thinking it. And then we're watching kids and being like, what do they need next? Oh, they need some help with this, right? They're showing me that our next teaching point would be this. So lots of information. I thank you guys so much for coming to keep learning and to keep thinking. Just an honor to be with you. And I feel so inspired by the work that you're doing with students. So keep it up and have a great rest of your summer.
Thanks, Kristen. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be
Thanks,
with you.
everybody, for showing up. We appreciate it. Hope everybody has a great rest of the day.